So you're here for compassionate communication. And you can see that it says an introduction to the conscious use of the creative process in transforming conflict. So one of the key words there is an introduction. This class typically can go, I've done it in 4 hours, I've done it in 8 weeks. So there's a lot here. So we're just going to cover some of the basic things about compassionate communication. And so let me ask you, what is your experience with communication? Were you ever trained in any way in what communication is about? And where did that take place? In an office setting? So, office setting, where was yours, Carol?
Previous spiritual center.
Through a previous spiritual center? Yes, ma'am.
Corporate sales training.
Corporate sales training, that's a great place. I've done corporate sales training. But for the most of us, we really haven't had any training in communication. Then we look at conflict. Conflict and communication don't seem like they go together very well, do they? It can be a real challenge. Let me take this mask off. There we go. All right. So, right here. What's that?
Poor communication is a source of a lot of conflict.
Poor communication is a source of a lot of conflict. Everybody agree with that? Yeah, because we haven't been trained. We don't know how to deal with it. And so usually in the workplace, it's, we've got to communicate our to-dos and our tasks. And when conflict comes up, it can be a real challenge in the workplace. So because there are so many dynamics attached to communication, we're not going to cover all of that, but I just want to give an example of what shows up. And John, if you could put the next slide up. So it says, I never told you John said you were stupid. Now you laugh. Now, is there any possibility that that sentence could be misunderstood? And actually, from the audio standpoint, hearing it, there's 9 different interpretations of what that can mean. So if we start with, I never told you John said you were stupid, somebody else did. I never told you John said you were stupid, that's a denial. I never told you John said you were stupid, right? I put it in writing. I never told you John said you were stupid. I told somebody else. I never told you John said you were stupid. Right, somebody else did. I never told you John said you were stupid. I just read about it. I never told you John said you were stupid. Everybody else. I never told you John said you were stupid. It's a continuing problem. I never told you John said you were stupid. I said you were lazy, uncooperative, or whatever, right? So there's a lot of interpretations to that. Now, what happens if that's sent as an email? Right? So depending on what the person's mental model is, they're going to interpret that maybe not how you intended it at all. So email can really be something that creates conflict. Now, what if you posted that on social media? You're just asking for it, right? So that's an example of how challenging this dynamic is of communication. So there's 9 interpretations of that. So let me ask this question. How do you feel about conflict? How do you feel about conflict? Anybody? I don't like that. I don't like it. But how do you feel about it? Painful. And what else? Anxious. Uncomfortable. Frustrating. Right? Conflict is not something that we just jump in and say, oh boy, rub our hands together. And yet the reality is, to some extent, that's what we need to do. That's where, especially in this community, where you have some training, that's what we have to be willing to do, is to step into that.
I'm sorry that I.
Let's see. These are not it.
That's okay. I'll just listen.
Okay. You might have,
Share with
I have one somewhere.
Okay, let's share.
Thank you. So it's painful, it's uncomfortable, we don't like it, but how do you usually respond to it? Anger, avoidance, avoidance. People would rather just stick needles in their eyes than deal with conflict. That's Jack Nicholson in some movie. I'd rather stick needles in my... Anyway, yeah, it's something that avoid at any cost. And how's that work for you? It doesn't work. What happens?
The conflict progresses and just gets worse.
It'll come back around. Bite you in the butt.
What happens if you have a conflict and you recognize it and you approach the person, but the person isn't willing to communicate with you?
That's a great question. What happens if I'm the only one? And I know my sister was a school teacher, and people wanted her to do this kind of work. And she says, why does it have to be me? You know, well, because you understand. You understand that it's got to be done. And you are responsible for the other person's being uncooperative. But that shouldn't stop you from doing your best to make a connection. And there are some ways that you can do, because what is it that they're really resisting? Change. It could be a lot of things, but change. Pardon me? Acceptance. The truth. All of these things. You don't know what their motivations are. So it could be they simply want to make a connection, but they don't know, they're afraid, they're upset, they may be wrong and not wanting to admit to it. So there's all sorts of things that can be happening there. It's really, where are we coming from? What is our responsibility? So John, if we could have the next slide. So how does this relate to science of mind principles? So the first one says oneness. All of life is one, connected, and divine. Try telling that to the person that doesn't want to engage, right? Spirit is an infinite wholeness that embraces all seeming opposites. Try and get on social media and make a case for that, right? This is a harder one to accept. The law of attraction. We attract what we are. What we experience is a mirror. That person that comes before us is there for us to learn something, to change something, to see them for what they truly are, going back to number one, right? All things work together for good, for our own growth and unfoldment. I hate that one. This conflict is for me, for good. But when we really think about it, you know, isn't that what we really believe? It's just so hard because we haven't been trained. We don't know how to bridge that gap, that in between what we'd really like to say and making connection with the other person. All right. So let's go to the next slide, John. The underlying communication intents and principles. This is where the rubber meets the road in terms of what is ours to do. The first is, who's responsible? Can we really accept? I am responsible for my experience. So if I've sent an email that is perhaps accusatory or just laying out the truth of what is going on, if the other person reacts, who's responsible? It's not the other person. You know, so that's one practice that I would recommend, especially with emails, is when you get an email and it triggers you, go take a walk. Go get a cup of coffee or tea. Don't or resist the tendency to respond right away. Or respond right away, but don't send it. Then get up and get your tea or coffee or whatever. Now, this is a simple thing, but how many people do it? How often is the tendency to just, because we're multitasking, right? Multitasking is a no-no if you're even serious about compassionate communication. You've got to be here now. You've got to be present. So where were we? I'm responsible. I attract to me those people who support my spiritual growth. That can be a hard one too. This person in my life that is always a thorn in my side is here to support my spiritual growth. Therein lies my path to God. So you can see where this is heading. You know, there's not nifty solutions to compassionate communication. It's doing the deeper work. The next one says, conflict represents an opportunity for the growth of each person and the relationship. So in your most significant relationship, is this how you look at it? When the conflict comes up, is it an opportunity for growth, or you just want to get through it and get it done? Just shut up and leave, because that's the avoidance of conflict. Sure, then we're only human, you know? And this is looking to go beyond our normal reactions, our default reaction. My self-esteem determines the quality of my relationship. How do you feel about that one? Yeah. If I don't feel I have the right information, or I don't feel complete, or what else? Not good enough. Not smart enough, not tall enough, too fat, too thin, too whatever it is. And here's my favorite. Connection is more important than content. So in the heat of an argument, in the heat of conflict, do we dare try and stop and make a connection? That can be hard. We don't know where to go. We're arguing with this person. And it may be the most important person in our life. You know, have you ever been to that place where, you know, you get into an argument and somewhere along the line you say, how did this happen? How did we get so heated about this issue that ultimately really isn't that important? You know, we just get to that place where you just kind of shake your head and say, I don't understand why we can't just connect. And part of that is backing up and seeing if you can make a connection. So what is conflict? Webster defines it this way: a mental struggle resulting from incompatible or opposing needs, drives, wishes, or external or internal demands. Okay? Conflict transformation is a little different. Conflict transformation has as its subject and purposes a constructive change. an effort that, while it includes conflict resolution, goes beyond the mere settlement of disputes. We are seeking to change the condition, the nature, or the function of conflict from a negative to a positive event that will improve lives. Yeah, I wish. I mean, isn't that where we're coming from? Is like, that's a mouthful. I'd like that, but is it really possible? How can I do that, right? So what, I think we're on the next slide. John, if you could put that up. What is the purpose of conflict? The purpose of conflict is to bring awareness to needed growth and change. So that can be a trigger or a flag to say, wait a minute, before I go any further, right? If I'm in conflict, then what needs to change? There's something here that wants to be known. Do I have the courage to really ask that question? The second is conflict is not a problem. It's part of the natural evolution of the relationship. If you've been in a relationship for a long time, are there any things that are chronic that keep coming up that you have the same argument over and over and over and over and over again? Money, whatever it is, date time. It's the natural evolution. So if we're having the chronic issue, that means we're avoiding something that really wants to be addressed. And what is it? When the pain of the condition, when the knowledge of the power outweighs the pain of the condition, a healing will occur. That was Dr. Tom Costa from Palm Springs. When the knowledge of the power outweighs the fear of the condition or the pain of the condition, a healing will occur. So you're just not in enough pain yet? Or you have immunized or vaccinated yourself against the pain. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of relationships go. It's just, oh, here she goes again, you know, and you just put up with it because it's easier to do that than to really try and grow the relationship. And that might be one of the first questions. Do we want to change? Is this enough for you? And it may be, you know, that the other person doesn't want to, right? And that's okay. I mean, if it's okay with you. We just live with it. So this gets to, you know, what is our commitment? Are we really committed to jumping into compassionate communication? The next one is we ask, how is this situation calling each of us to grow? It's a great question. We've had this chronic problem forever. How is this calling us to grow? Pardon?
It tells us to move on.
To move on, right. It may be. It may be. And nobody wants that kind of change, or maybe you do. You know, divorce is a real challenging thing, but after I went through my divorce, I was so happy. She was so happy. It's like we freed ourselves from this dance we were doing that neither one of us wanted to do. You know, so it's how is this situation calling each of us to grow? And the last one I really like, no one has to lose, but everyone has to change. No one has to lose, but everyone has to change. Great example of this is when Centers for Spiritual Living, before they became Centers for Spiritual Living, they were discussing integration with International Centers for Spiritual Living and United Centers for Spiritual Living. And there was a lot of fear around all of that because there was fear of it being an acquisition by one party over another, or a merger would be the best that we could hope for. And what actually happened is it was something that was created that was brand new. It was, what was the last one there? It was everyone has to change. No one has to lose, but everyone has to change. And once they accepted that we have to change, then they could begin the work of rebuilding or building a new organization. But it's having that willingness to really step into the common ground of everything's got to change. And it was really painful. I know, because I did a values assessment for the organization after integration, and there was still a lot of residual pain that was present. And it took a long time to begin to overcome that. So the next slide, please. So the primary principles of conflict transformation. So the principles. Can we accept that nothing has gone wrong? Something is calling us to change. Transforming conflict begins with transforming ourselves. Darn it. Why can't the other person just be the one? You know, after all, it's their problem. I'm good. John, if you could leave the slides up a little longer. Yes.
Is it the perception that something has gone wrong for each of the parties?
So the question is, has something,
Yeah. I used to lead negotiation teams, and one of the beliefs was that, yeah, something is wrong. They are not correct. The pricing is wrong, that this is wrong. So everybody had come to the table with this concept that you guys are wrong. This is wrong. There's something wrong. We got to fix this.
that's a great question. Is there actually times when something is wrong? Well, I'd like to say, well, maybe something's not working. Better. See, and this is the thing, is can we reposition things where the other party isn't blamed? And a question might be, well, is this working? When you present this to the customer, this is what happens. We don't want that to happen. What we need is a solution so this doesn't happen anymore. So that's kind of where we're going with this, is acknowledging that we've got to find a common ground here without pointing the finger. Because the languaging of making the other party wrong isn't helpful. It's not a place where you can come close to compassion. Yes.
I tried to use that on my family. It didn't work too well
Right. And why?
because nobody wants to change.
Nobody wants to change.
Nobody believes that they need to change.
There you go. Nobody believes that they need to change. And, you know, we're in this situation now where it's so divisive that that's a common belief that I don't need to change, you're just wrong. Well, that's not the place to start this kind of work. I mean, it's got to be with someone that you can perceive has a willingness to move beyond the conflict. I would say that's the first place to start, is there a willingness? And usually that's a deeper connection that you have with someone already, right?
Yeah, the family is different than, you can walk away from other people with, we agree to disagree.
Right.
But it doesn't always work with the family, especially if you're the matriarch and the rest of them are the kids.
Yeah, yeah. So as I said, there's a lot of dynamics here that, you know, is there a willingness, all those other principles in place, you know, starting with the science of mind principles, if they're not there, if they don't believe that there's, you know, common ground, I mean, let's call oneness common ground, then it's really difficult. Then do they want to find common ground? That's a whole different thing. You had a question?
When my mother had been alive, she was always the one that was matriarch. And I was always the little one. And I go, okay. And then she goes, and one day she goes, what's the matter? She's really angry with me. I go, I don't understand. I really don't understand. She goes, I I just go, all right, fine. And I close the door, and she goes, where you go? What are you doing? You just closed the door on me. Yes, because you were just angry, and I can't take it anymore. That's it. And she goes, that's it? I mean, just, we have to do this.
And that's pretty typical of how we get involved in this. You had a question?
I was going to say, it seems that there are some people that seem to thrive on conflict, and that's really tough because I guess it's a power issue or a lot of different things, but they really just seem to thrive on it, and they go in and they create it if it's not even there.
And can we do anything about that? Well, we can leave and, you know. But it is a challenge, and I would suggest that they're not thriving, that there's something inside of them that is aware of what they're causing, and it may come back to them in terms of disease or something like that. They're not at peace, that's for sure. I mean, if they thrive on conflict, I mean, that's a hard thing to believe. Anyway, was there another question? So the bottom line is we have to have the willingness to transform ourselves. Next slide, please. How does conflict arise? When there is conflicts, the feelings, needs, wants, or values of an individual or group are not being adequately honored, understood, or satisfied. That's what was going on, Melinda, is something isn't being made apparent. And we don't have a way of accessing that to find out what the feelings, needs, wants are because we've never been trained. We don't know how to do that. So the typical thing is to slam the door, close the conversation off. I mean, it's human nature. It's natural because we don't know what else to do. The guy that enjoys conflict, that's what he's doing. That's all he can deliver. He doesn't know what else to do. And so we're stuck in a situation of, you know, just walking away. An option would be, you seem very angry. You know, just calling out what you're observing. And that can be a challenge too. Are we interpreting what they're doing or are we observing what they're doing? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, do we have any clue as to what a person is feeling? These things are in everybody. Feelings, needs, wants, values. But the importance that a person puts on them is different for everybody. Okay? That's an important thing to understand. I may share the same feelings with you, but I don't know what you need because of those feelings. And until we can start to find out what those are, we're not going to make any progress. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about feelings. This is one of the most challenging things that I've experienced in a relationship is when I ask someone, how do you feel? How do you feel about climate change? The typical response is, well, I think here's what we should do, right? I think that this is the solution. I think this, that, and the other thing is people are not in touch with their feelings. And until you can acknowledge and make clear what you're feeling, nothing's going to happen. It can happen, but chances are people can't argue with what you're feeling. They can argue with what you think, but they can't argue with you. You couldn't tell your mom that she wasn't feeling angry. You're not feeling angry. You have an underlying need of whatever it is, me cleaning my room or whatever it is. So being able to express what our feelings are, being in touch with, and feeling our feelings is essential to authentic communication. Much conflict arises from the distance between what we feel and think and what we actually do. Right? Is there a gap there? I'm feeling angry, so I just walk out. Does that solve anything? It'll give you a gap to think about how do I want to handle this. And that to me is the hardest thing is, taking time to take a deep breath and think about, what is mine to do here? What am I being called forward to do? Because it's not always clear what it is. And if it's not, then you have to ask more questions. So the other part of feelings is being in touch with our feelings brings us fully into our bodies, being fully present. So we can't really be present when we're thinking about how we want to respond. How often in a conversation with someone's telling you something, are you sitting there and what's going on in your head? What you're going to say. What is it that I'm going to say? And so you're not present at all to what's happening. How often does that happen? For me, too often. I have what I call my left-hand column. I walk into a room and I say, well, the chairs aren't straight. The microphone's off to the side. The podium's crooked. My left-hand column is just going. So if I get in a conversation with somebody, it's like, who's going to fix that? You know what I mean? What can we do to be present in the moment? Well, we have to feel our feelings. So in that case, it would be, hold on a minute. Marjorie, I'm really not focused right now. Can we do something about the podium? It's just admitting my own feelings about what's going on and being able to articulate it. I'm feeling upset, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling delighted with what is going on in service, whatever it is. It's not always conflict, but being able to express our feelings. Feelings arise within us because of something in us, not from something outside of us. So in that case of me saying things are crooked or wrong or whatever, it's because, Marjorie, I have a need for order. I really like things to be organized. When I'm not, I get off track. And I would really like to see us fix that. Now you notice I used the personal pronoun I. What happens if I come in and say, Marjorie, you guys don't know what you're doing. I always come in here and things are always sloppy. Now that's an interpretation. The first was an observation instead of an interpretation. And we'll talk more about that. The second thing are needs. Feelings, needs. Needs are those things that allow us to feel safe, whole, and fulfilled. Example of needs are Maslow's hierarchy: survival, food, water, shelter. Love, belonging, care, compassion, understanding, validation, being seen. Self-expression, creativity, sharing talents. Those are needs that we have. Are we aware of them? Sometimes we're not even aware of what we need. And that's because we're not in touch with our feelings. You see, it kind of builds. So if we know what we're feeling, then we can ask the question, well, what am I really needing here? I need order. I need safety. Is this making sense? So clarifying what our needs are, then we come to values. Values are wants. Wants are things we desire, our preferences. So examples are a particular lifestyle, a certain kind of relationship, a degree of solitude versus time with others, a location of where we live. So even though you've been with someone forever, have you articulated those wants in terms of a particular lifestyle. Oh, I'm just a stay-at-home kind of guy. And you want to travel all over the world. Is there going to be any conflict there? Right. But if I've never told my significant other that I'm at peace, I find safety and comfort in just being a homebody, then they can say, that's great, I'm not going to take away from that. And is it okay if I go to this conference or whatever it is? So a lot of this is just not being present to what our own wants and needs are. And the last one is values. Values are what is important to us that underlies our needs and wants. So examples of values are spirituality, financial stewardship, family, friendship, stability, freedom, security, all of those things. So what I have found in many of our Science of Mind communities is the value of spirituality can be a source of conflict in many relationships. Has anyone here found that to be true? Yeah. Yeah. Because very often one of the partners in the relationship doesn't put the value on spirituality that you do. Do they have to? No. But can we talk about it so that the conflict doesn't arise? This is a tricky thing to navigate. And again, this is an introduction to bring the awareness about how compassionate communication really works. So let's see where we are time-wise. So we talked about some of the things that underlie compassionate communication. One of them is language. What is the impact and intention? Well, the first slide was the language of tone of voice. My first relationship with my relationship with my first wife, she would always say, your tone is just terrible. You know, I would say something that I thought was just an observation, but there was something about my tone that was very accusatory. You know, so it was an observation of, well, here you go again, you know, you left this out in the rain, and I've had to go clean it up. And it would be worse than that, you know, putting emphasis on the wrong syllable. You know, you sometimes need those first marriages to make the second one right. The next thing about language is before you open your mouth, get clear on your intention. What is my intention here? So in that instance, if I had said, dear one, when I come home and I see you left something or that there's something out in the rain and it's now been ruined, I get angry. And I don't want to be angry with you. I simply want our things to be taken care of. So can we make an agreement that we will take responsibility for whatever? So it's taking the time to position what it is I want to say with an intention. Make your connection or intention about connecting and expanding love. So I think that's what I did there is I don't want to be angry with you. I love you. I want to spend my life with you. And that didn't work out. Because I wasn't ready for it. I was immature. I couldn't speak about my needs, my wants, and my values. We didn't even go there in our relationship. It was just automatic. You know, we just lived together, had a good time, did our things, and found that our values were just different at the end of the day. No one was wrong. See, that's another part. We don't make anybody wrong. It's just the opportunity for growth was there, that something had to change. Hard lessons. And here's my favorite about language. Impact doesn't always equal intent. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So we when we're saying something and not clarifying our intention, then, I mean, how many times do you get into a situation where you say, well, that wasn't my intention. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't mean to upset you. Well, where did we start the conversation? Was it an accusatory way or blame way? Or second is listening. Listening is an active, fully engaged practice. Multitasking is incompatible with active listening. How often do we do that? We're at our desk on the computer doing whatever we're doing. Email pops up, taking us to task for something we did or didn't do, and we turn and we start answering that email. Meanwhile, you have something else going on, that you're working on. Well, it'll only take a minute. Studies have shown, it used to be in the 90s and early 2000s, people were advertising for people that could multitask. This is something that we really do in our organization. We just are on the go all the time. We need to multitask because we really want to be productive. And studies have shown that multitasking is unproductive. It's better to stay focused on one thing. And we used to do a lot of training about that, and people just resist it. You don't need to answer your emails every 5 minutes. One company that I worked with had instant messaging in addition to email in their culture. And so people were constantly being bombarded with messages about all things, all sorts of things. I mean, personal things. Hey, are you going to the party tonight? Or this customer isn't happy with this, you've got to do something right away. And then 3 other emails would pop up. People were not getting anything done, and then they'd have to go to a meeting. And they wonder, anyway, that's a whole different thing. Listening is not just about hearing the words, it's being fully present with what is being expressed. Are we present with the person that we're talking to? So here's a tip. If you're wondering about whether you're being present with someone, find out what color their eyes are. If you notice what color their eyes are, chances are you're fully present. Right? So it's just a little thing to help bring you to the present moment, to be there now rather than thinking about what you're going to say. So all of these things are little things that help build your case to being more compassionate. And then you get into the whole thing with body language and are you paying attention to the body language and all of that, which is beyond the scope of this workshop. More importantly about listening is paraphrasing what you've heard. That can be helpful to engage and connect. So someone's saying something to you, maybe it's your significant other, maybe it's a kid, and they're throwing a temper tantrum. And you can change that in a minute by listening and asking them or making an observation. You seem to be really upset right now. I can't tell you how many times just simply doing that has changed the conversation. Stephen Covey always talked about when he had a teenage daughter that his daughter would come in and he'd be reading the paper or on his computer or whatever, and he would notice her come in and say, how's your day? And she would just say, good, and just go up the stairs. And so he said, this isn't working for me. So he made a commitment that when she came in, he would stand up and walk up to her and say, how was your day? And if she said, fine, he would say, well, can you tell me a little bit about it? It was a conscious effort to make connection. And he would say, you can't begin to speak from your autobiography until you understand where they're at. So the way I was raised was, well, when I was your age, do we do that now with anybody? Well, back in the good old days, well, the good old days is an excuse for a poor memory as far as I'm concerned. These are the good old days right now. And we have to find the good in them because they weren't in the good old days. So paraphrasing, asking back, is this what you were saying? Is this what you were asking about? Because very often they'll clarify and say, no, that's not it at all. We misheard them, or they weren't articulate. But asking them, did you really mean to send that email? Asking them. So all of this leads up to, John, can we have the next slide? Being able to tell the truth. And this can be difficult. We are often not very honest with each other. We avoid telling the truth. We beat around the bush about it, right? We never get to the point. We will tell someone else, often by complaining, what we really want or need or how we're feeling. How's that working for you? A big part of transforming conflict is to say what we really mean, what we feel, need, want, and value. So there was a gentleman called, I can't remember his name now. It'll come to me. He wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication. Maybe you've heard of it. Rosenberg. But he developed this process of being able to tell the truth about where you're at in any one point by making observations, reflecting back what you think you've heard, and putting it in language where your intention is made clear. And I've already used some of those pieces. But a key piece is being able to tell the difference between an observation and an interpretation. So an example of that, when something doesn't contribute to my well-being. So I come home and the dishes are in the sink, the laundry is not folded, and so let's say it's the woman. The woman's working out of the house all day. She comes home, finds the sink filled with dirty dishes, the laundry unfolded. She has a choice of how she says anything to her husband who works at home. Okay? So what are some of those things that she might say?
Shall we fold clothes together?
Well, I'm in the middle of something right now. So what is the observation that you want to make? Because he doesn't know what you're talking about. Okay, I feel really uncomfortable when things are cluttered. Is that an interpretation or an observation?
Good point. I feel really uncomfortable when the dishes accumulate in the sink.
So we can be more specific, right? So what is it that you're wanting?
I want to feel comfortable.
This isn't hard to do, right? I need help. So it's hard for me to feel at peace when you leave the house messy. Is that an interpretation or an observation? It is an interpretation. It's a judgment. Well, honey, I've been doing all these other things. I haven't had a chance to get in, so then the conflict starts. So you're right, I feel uncomfortable. I feel frustrated that when I come home, the sink is filled with dirty dishes, the laundry hasn't been folded, and I don't want to feel that way. Then you can take it even further. What I want is to not feel that way. What I want is to have our agreements kept.
Oh, that means we have to have an agreement.
That's right. That's right. So let me ask you, I feel frustrated when you are lazy. Is that that's an interpretation, isn't it? How about this one? I felt upset when you told me I look fat in these jeans. Is that an interpretation or an observation?
That's an observation.
That's an observation. It's not an interpretation. Well, no. There's no judgment there. Well, he was just speaking, I'm assuming it's a he. Oh boy. That's not recorded, is it? I felt upset when you told me I look fat in these jeans. Honey, do I look fat? Or how do I look in these jeans? Honey, you look fat. It's an observation. Telling your truth. So you can see, what's the quality of your relationship? Where are you willing to grow? Let's see.
Difference to me if you're not saying you're fat.
That's right.
Saying, I don't feel comfortable. When you get that I statement in there and how it affects me, then it
Right.
is less.
You're always telling me that I look fat in my clothes.
Right.
That's an interpretation. Because he may not be aware, first of all. He may never have said that. But when you say, I felt upset when you told me, yes.
Well, is there a difference between blunt truth and having maybe biting your tongue if it's not kind? How do you kind of maneuver?
Well, I think it really depends on the blunt truth that you're trying to express. Because to do that without judgment,
Yeah.
There are dirty dishes in the sink. There's laundry that is not folded. Those are facts,
Right.
you know.
So then it's the tone and the attitude.
Tone and the attitude of,
Also, who's supposed to be responsible, because you should make, I had a husband who was a doll, and he would wash the dishes, and he'd help me fold clothes, and we did things together.
yeah,
And,
because you had an agreement.
yeah,
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 and that's a lovely thing, believe me.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was my husband's would never have said that to me.
Keith,
It's funny, sometimes when I'm asked a question like that, it has like some risk.
there's a smart man right there.
Okay, or you want critical feedback? Because there's two things that sometimes is being asked, right? If A is what, great, or, well, might be this.
Right, right.
But also recognizing that that is an opinion as well. I mean, we're treating it as a stated fact. He did say, yes, you look fat in those jeans, that is a fact. But that in itself was an opinion. So there is an interpretation on his, we're assuming his part.
Right, but the question here is not whether it was his opinion, it's whether her statement is an interpretation or an observation.
Understand.
Yeah, so that's the difference there, because yes, it's his opinion that she looks fat, but she asked. Rachel,
So I have an observation, it's who is doing the asking. Because if you consider, if your husband's asking you, you're already setting yourself up for a certain kind of what you want and what you don't want. If your girlfriend's telling you that, it's a whole different ballgame.
So the context is critical, and that's what we were saying. The context really makes a difference. You've got to know the audience. Because you expect that from your girlfriend. You may not expect it from your significant other. The risk. All right. So this is just touching, the tip of the iceberg on compassionate communication. Keith, yeah, Keith. John, do we have another slide? Yes.
Could you explain what context is? I've never really fully understood that.
Okay. The context is that I would feel safe sharing embarrassing things with this group because there's trust and understanding here. So I could say silly things like I did because I trust that the context here is a supportive group. I wouldn't share that if this was the public at large. Maybe I would, but.
So it's kind of, is it kind of like the temperature of the group, or?
It's the temperature, it's a combination of a lot of factors. Trust is, I think, primary among them. So that you can be honest and truthful, and so the context of what you're walking into is really critical to how much you have a willingness to share.
That trust, that's
Yeah.
what, okay, that helps, thank you.
Yes.
How do you deal with communication with somebody who is emotionally immature and cannot deal with feelings and emotions? So your
Right.
conversation is constantly like this.
You do the best you can. I mean, if someone is not cooperative, you're not going to get anywhere, but that shouldn't stop you from trying. It depends on the nature of the relationship, the context of the relationship, and what the intention is. Marjorie.
I'm just going to make a plug for a book club. We're reading a book called The Art of Possibility, and in it he does discuss this context. And at one point he says, the best way for a successful relationship is one in which they build a context in which they are both comfortable and maybe not everybody getting everything they want, but they develop a context where they can both be comfortable.
That's great. That's great. It's like, what are the rules for how we're going to engage with one another? If we can clarify those first, then we have a context that we agree on. This is something that we're doing with our care groups, where we try and set the context first so we agree about how we're going to be with one another. And if we can agree on that, then almost anything that anybody says in that context can be said. Okay? So we're running out of time. I think we did this. John, if you could get the next slide. So mental models, mental constructs, these are the biggest obstacles to having compassionate communication. Rigid mental construct has real potential to create conflict. So this guy that thrives on conflict has a mental model that's how it's supposed to be done. If you want anything done, do it right and do it your way. So that's his mental model. So it's going to be difficult to break through that. When we believe something has to be a certain way, there's conflict when it isn't that way. Okay? The wine glasses go on the top shelf. If we can shift it from a should to a want, a need or value, we can use it to grow the relationship. So doing the research, the work, and diving deeper into what the real need is can help us to break through. Assuming others should know what we want. You guys are laughing too quickly. You know what this is about. We've been married for 30 years. You should know what I'm saying. Or in a business, it can work the same way. So I haven't done real justice to Marshall Rosenberg, is his name, for nonviolent communication. I've done nonviolent communication in a workshop in our community back in Orlando. There's a workbook for it, and it really dives deep into this type of work because it takes a lot of practice and a lot of heartache to really work through it. And you end up asking, well, why am I the one? Why can't they do it? Well, it's because you know better. You know better. Okay, the next slide, please. This is just a primer for how to communicate in this community. So this is called Respectful Communication, adapted by Edward V. Young, who's now the CSL's spiritual leader. And it's a great handout for remembering what's going on in our community. So I'll start. If you have a problem with me, come to me privately. If I have a problem with you, I'll come to you privately. If someone has a problem with me and comes to you, send them to me. I'll do the same. Are these sounding familiar at all? If someone consistently will not come to me, say, let's go to the minister or the manager or the director together. I'm sure he, she will see us about this. I will do the same for you. Please do not interpret me. I would rather you ask me what I meant. On matters that are unclear, do not feel pressure to interpret my feelings or thoughts. I would rather you ask me. Next slide, John. Does everyone know what interpret means? Do not interpret me.
Yeah, that's my biggest problem with my granddaughter. She says, I'm feeling this, feeling that, and feeling the other thing, and it's making her feel stupid. And
I can't help how you feel if you're feeling stupid. But yeah, that's a big challenge. I will be careful how I interpret you, and if I am unclear, I will ask you what you meant. So that might be something that you can ask. What did you mean? If it is confidential, don't tell me. If it is confidential, don't ask me to tell you. I do not read unsigned letters or notes. I do not respond to unnamed complaints, some of which begin with, I have heard several people saying. How often does that happen? I've heard several people saying. Please do not hint to me, hoping I will understand your need and know what you intend me to hear. I prefer you say exactly what you mean. I will not hint to you, hoping you will understand my need or know what I mean you to hear. I will try to say exactly what I mean. Here's one of my favorites. Parking lot or hallway griping is poisonous. If you need to complain, please do it only with the intention of healing it. And even then, tell only the one who can do something about it. This can destroy a community. When in doubt, just say it. The only dumb question is the one that doesn't get asked. Please believe me that my intent is honorable and the best interest of the center organization. Do not take what I say personally. And finally, you may not understand why I say and do some things because of confidentiality. Trust that everything is working for the highest good. Does this make sense? Are they useful for you? A touchstone that when you walk into the parking lot and someone starts a conversation, maybe you can say, wait, let's bring that complaint to the practitioner corps, the minister, or my boss, or whatever, all right? So the final thing is called the Sacred Space Covenant. And again, we're handing something out to you. Thank you. John, if you could change the slide. We did that one. Yes, well, the next one. Okay. Actually, the one before that. All right, this is called the Sacred Space Covenant. And I'm going to ask different people to read. So, Carol Ann, if you could read the first paragraph.
Sacred Space Covenant. Bless you. Believing that good or God is infinite means it is everywhere. Then every place is sacred space, not just a church or a shrine, but everywhere, all at the same time. It may be hard to believe that all of God is present at every point of creation, which means right where I am and right where you are. No matter how dark or dreary the place, physically or mentally, it is empowering to remember we are standing on sacred ground and always immersed in spirit.
Would you continue the next paragraph? Oh, you need your glasses.
Be consciously focusing on the presence and power that we live in and are immersed in. We create special places that support the harmony and balance we need in our homes, in our workspace, and everywhere we come together with others. We can accomplish great things when we have first created a safe, sacred place where we can be ourselves and express openly.
The idea of sacred space covenant came about years ago when a student in class said she did not feel safe to speak and share. It was an upper-level class which included some strong personalities who were convinced they knew all the answers. It was a challenge for us all, a way to get a whole class to respect others' perspectives and stay on the same page, was to create the following covenant, which makes all the difference.
Thank you. I live in a universe that welcomes me just as I am. It, God, created me as a perfect expression of itself. It accepts me with unconditional love and provides me with the space I need to live comfortably and easily. I know this sacred space is essential to my well-being. It frees me to accept my humanness, my imperfections, and more appreciate my divine nature. I freely and lovingly make this kind of space available to others who are near me, allowing them to be real and true selves. I extend my heart. I provide the wisdom available to me when asked and choose words which neither impose nor judge, but guide others in knowing what is right for them. I am divinely supported in knowing how to do this. I give thanks for knowing sacred space is provided for us all. I enjoy living in a universe of love, and so it is. And so I'm going to ask you, as we read these bullet points, to sign and date this as your covenant to this community. All right? So it says, I've read the guidelines for respectful communications. I agree to listen and be present and not try to fix or give advice. I agree to bring my best love and attention to whatever or whomever is before me, including and especially myself. I agree to practice non-judgment. I agree to love and accept myself and others as they are. I agree to stay in the present, the now moment of power. And I use as my guide, if it is loving, if it grows, expands, or deepens love, it's the right thing to do. And so if you choose, I'd like you to sign this and date it and keep it for yourself. I'm not going to collect them. And so I hope you've gotten a introduction to some of the key points of compassionate communication. And this is the work that I love to do. And if you have any questions, I'll be available after to answer them, hopefully.